What if I told you that there is a particular component that can be found in pretty much any tube amplifier that anyone can change, swap, mod, just anyone who has basic soldering skills. And that component actually changes how the amplifier feels, how it responds to your pick attack, how it sounds with your pickups, how it responds to pedals. It just changes a bunch of adjectives that describe your amplifier. And on top of that, that is super fun to experiment with. So bypass the hype and plug in your brains, because we are going slightly technical on the topic of grid stoppers and more. So as I usually say on this channel, everything matters in audio, so every time you change something in a circuit, it is going to change how it feels, sounds. It's gonna do something to the sound. I'm not one of these people who says it does nothing, and I'm also not one of those people that says it is crucial for it to be like this, because it is not. And we all hear different and feel different things and want different things. So the point of this video is to demonstrate a technique how you can do actually something to your amplifier that is going to make it sound unique and, what is most important, to your liking. But first, obviously, we need to actually explain how it works so you actually understand what you're doing, because it's not magic, it is magic that you understand. So I already said we're talking about grid stoppers. What are grid stoppers? Well, grid stoppers we usually see as resistors in our amplifiers. So imagine this, our guitar is plugged in to our amplifier through a cable, and that cable is pretty much directly connected to the first gain stage, to the first tube, to a triode called the grid. Now in some amplifiers it is actually connected directly, but in some amplifiers it goes through a certain component that is usually a resistor. Now this resistor is quite interesting because it does multiple things. Not only that it is going to attenuate a portion of the signal because it creates a resistive divider with your input impedance of your first input stage. So basically what I'm saying is that resistor, it kind of sucks a little bit of your signal, but for good reason. Now, not only that it attenuates the signal, but with tubes, we actually have something special going on. Since the tubes are not really perfect devices, they have something called the Miller capacitance, and when you increase this resistor, it sort of creates a low-pass filter and it kind of cuts the highs. So the larger the resistor, you get like more attenuation, but also the sound is getting darker. Well, in most cases, we don't really want our sound to get darker and muddy and use whatever adjective you want, but in most cases, it is really necessary. You need to cut some of these frequencies so you remove parasitic oscillations. If you would remove this component in some amplifiers, they would start oscillating and become completely useless. So basically this one magic component does attenuation and it also does filtering. It is a super simple way that is used in guitar amplifiers to do multiple tasks that are actually necessary in these amplifiers, and that is cutting some of the highs and doing a little bit of attenuation. Now, yes, there are some amplifiers that use these and some amplifiers that don't use them. Usually in vintage amplifiers, you're gonna see grid stoppers, but in some modern high-gain amplifiers, they don't use them. And pretty much the reason why you will not find grid stopper resistors in some high-gain amplifiers is because they're trying to lower the noise, because these grid stoppers do introduce some kind of noise, and a little bit more on that later. And let's take a quick look at a few examples. Take a look at this. This is a JCM 800 and it uses a 68K grid stopper resistor. Why does it use one, you would say? Well, that resistor actually calms the amplifier down a little bit, and it drastically helps with the oscillations, because if you have a JCM 800, try removing it. See what happens. So what I'm saying, it is really necessary for this resistor to be over there. But sometimes these JCM 800 amplifiers feel they don't have enough gain. The question is there a component that we could potentially use that would do the filtering part, so we remove these oscillations, but doesn't do the attenuation part, so we effectively just get more gain? And the answer is absolutely yes. It is the Ferrite bead. Now, ferrite beads are very interesting, and some of you have probably heard of them being used in amplifiers such as the Mesa Boogie rectifier. And basically this component, what it actually does, it has an extremely low resistance at low frequencies, but as the frequencies grow, the impedance of this device increases. Therefore, it sort of does the filtering thing, but it doesn't really attenuate the signal. Now, there are a lot of different ferrite beads, and sometimes you don't really know which one you need to buy, and I will give you a few tips. The ones used in the rectifier measure 3.3 microfarads. It is crucial to limit the intake of drugs on a daily basis, so you would know the difference between microfarads and microhenries. Inductance is measured in henries. What I meant to say is microhenries, 3.3 microhenries. Thank you. That information is quite important because if you use some of them, like these bigger ones, they have a higher inductance, therefore they're gonna cut more highs. So depending on the inductance of these things, you're going to be choosing how much of the highs you are going to cut. So depending on where you're buying these components, in some of these places, they don't really state what is the impedance of it. Just buy the smallest one you can get your hands onto, and it is most probably going to sound great. One very important tip here is not to use inductors, because if you think that you're gonna get an inductor that is 3.3 microfarads, that is not a good idea, because inductors are something different. Ferrite beads are actually designed to remove these parasitic oscillations, and they are perfect for this application, where using inductors can actually enhance some of these resonances and do a lot of shit in your amplifier. Now a few more words about resistors, because that is actually the classic way how it was done. And if you take a look at this schematic, this is a Plexi type of circuit, just like a 4-input Marshall thing. And you can see that they have these 68K resistors right over here for the low and high input. And the way how that works is that when you plug your guitar into the high input, these two 68K resistors are going to be wired in parallel, resulting in a resistance of around about like 33 kilo ohms, which is lower than 68, and therefore whenever you plug into the high input of like a Marshall 4-input style amplifier, it is going to have more gain and it's going to be brighter, where the low input is darker and lower gain. This is important to know because now you actually know how it sounds. It is actually a drastic difference. And then if we move to amplifiers which don't really use any kind of grid stoppers, and that thing exists, take a look at this example. This is an angle amplifier and it doesn't use any grid stoppers. Basically, your guitar signal is directly connected to the grid of the power tube and it works. Now, it's important to understand that in some amplifiers this thing works, in some amplifiers it really doesn't work. And for this video we have an angle amplifier right behind me, and we are going to be experimenting with this amplifier. You are going to be able to hear how it sounds without any grid stoppers, how it sounds with resistors, and how it sounds with ferrite beads. Wow. So excited. Now I just want to say before we start with the sound samples that by changing these components we are not gonna be getting some drastic sonic difference, especially over YouTube, and that changing this component is not going to make you Eddie Van Halen. You will just have to trust me that it really changes how the amplifier responds, and it is super fun to play around with. So I'm gonna use my guitar and we are gonna be doing some high gain examples. Even though all these things actually work on low gain amplifiers, I just think that the differences in high gain examples will be a little bit more obvious, a little bit better for the YouTube thing. And I'm playing an angle amplifier, so we're just gonna do high gain. Alright, so basically this is the angle stock, so without any grid stopper, and what we are going to be doing now is we are going to be adding some grid stoppers. Alright, so needless to say is that you need to discharge your amplifier because you can actually get hurt. Now in this particular amplifier, it is a PCB based amp, nothing exactly special about this amplifier, nothing really fancy, but here we can actually see where the wire, actually the cable, because it's a shielded cable, comes from our input jack. And I'm going to desolder it right over here where it's connected to the PCB, because on the PCB there is a trace that connects this wire, which is effectively the hot plus of our signal, and it connects it to the grid of the power tube. And I am going to connect a resistor to this wire, and I'm gonna connect the other end of the resistor to the grid. One very important thing to understand, that I'm gonna be exchanging these components, so I'm doing something that's gonna be temporary. If I was doing this for like long term, I would not be soldering this in this particular way. I just want to connect it so it sort of stays connected for our example, but realistically, I would just do it a lot cleaner if I was doing it for long term. One important thing is that grid stoppers should always be connected directly on the tube, not here on the jack, not anywhere on the PCB, because all that increases the noise and some potential parasitic oscillations. So one very good modification for your amplifier is just to bring your grid stoppers closer to the tubes, because it will definitely improve a lot of things. It is very unfortunate that a lot of companies actually don't do that because they're, I don't know, either stupid or trying to cut some cost. It should be done like this always. Oh, and by the way, if you're getting any value from this video, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and go visit the Slightly Technical Academy at slightlytechnicalacademy.com, where you can actually find some free Tonex samples of this particular amp that we are playing in this video, and you can also buy some full packs which are really packed with some great sounds. That's the way how you can actually support what I'm doing on this channel, and I really thank you for it. Alrighty, and we are back now with the 33K resistor as our grid stopper, and I can immediately hear that the sound is a little bit different because the noise is a little bit different. It actually feels more like a Marshall. I understand that that is a stupid explanation, but when I play high gain amplifiers and when I get this kind of a feeling, it kind of feels like a Marshall. I can't explain it any better at the moment, but it feels it's a little bit cleaner in the top end, and it has a tad gain less, but nothing that I cannot stand or I don't like. So what we're gonna do now is we're moving to 68K. Very interesting. It kind of sounds even cleaner now because logically it's going to get a little bit more attenuation, and it sounds cleaner because of the loss of the high frequencies. You're sort of cleaning up the distortion. Now when I listen to the sound samples that I recorded, I will sort of figure out, like, was it really noticeably darker? But we are really talking about an amplifier that has a powerful equalizer, so if it feels like a little bit darker, you can just tweak the treble knob or raise the presence a little bit and it's going to be just fine. Now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be installing the Ferrite Bead, and let's see how that sounds. So I'm giving you my live comments now. Basically with the Ferrite Bead, everything kind of sounded a little bit more similar to how it was without anything. I kind of hear that noise again. There is some kind of high frequency, like sizzle happening in the noise, which is not exactly important, but I can't wait to hear how it sounded when I listen to the actual sound samples. Something very important to add is that resistors as grid stoppers always add noise. They don't remove noise. The reason why I sort of thought that I heard a little bit less noise is pretty much because the gain lowers. The amplifier is open over there and it's picking up all kinds of weird shit from the room because it's not properly shielded, so it was kind of normal to hear a little bit less noise. Now the important thing, always use metal filled resistors for the grid stopper on your first gain stage, because the noise that a full of mojo carbon composition resistor can add in this gain stage will be amplified throughout the amplifier, and I never advise doing that, at least if you want to have a somewhat high gain circuit. By the way, all the examples that you're hearing are with the amplifier set equally in terms of all the gain or equalizer settings. What kind of conclusion can we draw now, and can we achieve some other things using this exact same mod? Here's my take on this. In the case of a high gain amplifier like this Angle one, which can be considered a modern amplifier, which doesn't feature a grid stopper resistor in the input natively, you can achieve multiple things by adding one. You could hear that from the examples. By adding a grid stopper resistor, you actually lower the gain a little bit, which is in some cases really good, and you also lose a little bit of the high end on the input, which we did not really hear as a loss in high end. Rather, the amplifier became fatter in a weird way. And as you increase the value of the resistor, you're gonna lose more gain. It's gonna become more darker, in a way becoming more vintage sounding, because I understand this is a weird word to use, but it is true that most vintage amplifiers actually have these 68K resistors, which contribute greatly to the way how the vintage amplifiers sound. So in case you have an Angle amplifier which you love but you want it to sound a little bit more vintage, maybe using a resistor is a great way to go. Now obviously you saw that you can use a Ferrite Bead, which is going to change how the amplifier sounds in terms of that fatness and the high frequency thing, but you actually don't lose the gain. And the higher the inductance of the Ferrite bead, the more high end you are going to lose. So with this one component, you can actually tailor this amplifier to perfection. Another great example of tweaking the grid stopper resistor is, let's say you have a JCM 800 Marshall and you're not really happy with this amplifier because usually JCM 800s, they kind of lack a little bit of gain. You don't need much, but you need just a little bit. You could actually swap the input grid resistor with the Ferrite bead. By doing this, you will raise the gain a little bit, but you will maintain the filter that is sort of taking care of those oscillations, which would normally happen if you would just remove the grid stop resistor. Effectively sticking to the core JCM 800 sound, just with a little bit more gain and a little bit of a new, just like a different modern polish. You can obviously change the grid stop resistors on your vintage amplifiers if you feel like you want them to be a little bit faster, a little bit more responsive. If they're dark in some way, you can lower the value of the grid stop resistors. The 68K you can change for a smaller value like a 33K. The JCM 900 I think use like a 10K, so you can go even lower with the grid stop resistor. The lower the value of the grid stopper resistor, the less noisy it is. So it's just some food for thought. Well, I certainly hope you learned something today. I thank everybody for watching. Please support the channel by subscribing, liking, and join the Slightly Technical Academy. And I'll be seeing you in the next video extremely very soon.